I'm going to demonstrate how to use the ICD-10-CM codebook for looking up medical codes for diagnosis coding for both inpatients and outpatients. When you get this codebook for your first coding class, it looks really intimidating because it's so thick and it's so full of medical conditions and codes. And it is really quite simple to use when you learn the process. So we're going to start with a scenario. The scenario we're going to code is this 62-year-old male is being seen for mild non-proliferative diabetic retinopathy with macular edema. He has type 2 diabetes mellitus and takes insulin on a daily basis. He also has diabetic cataract in his right eye. What diagnosis codes are assigned? First, we have to determine what the principal diagnosis is. And in this case, it is diabetic retinopathy. That is the main reason after study that he was seen for this visit. There's additional descriptive terms about that diabetic retinopathy, and in some cases it might be covered in one code. In other cases, we might need two codes to tell the complete story about his condition. In addition to that, we're going to code an additional code of diabetic cataract in the right eye. In some cases, ICD-10 has right and left codes. In other cases, they don't. So we'll have to look up that code and determine how specific we can get. In addition, he takes insulin on a daily basis, so we're going to have a third code for that. We don't code drugs all the time, but we do code long-term use of drugs like insulin would be for a diabetic. So I'm going to start by looking in my alphabetical index for diabetic retinopathy. We always start in the alphabetical index. And so I'm going to look for diabetes. And I found diabetes with, and so if I go down that list, on the next page I find retinopathy. So I've got diabetes with a subterm of with, and then a subterm under that of retinopathy. I see some additional subterms below that. I see with macular edema, and then I see non-proliferative. And non-proliferative is the type that he has. I see with macular edema below that, and then I also see mild with macular edema. So in the description we have of mild, non-proliferative diabetic retinopathy with macular edema, that's the most specific we can get. So the code is E11.321. In some cases, when I get to the tabular list, I may find that that's the correct code. In other cases, I might find that I need to find a code nearby that is actually the correct code. So I need to go to the tabular list and look up E11.321. I move back to the tabular section, and it's in alphanumeric order, so I'm going to go to the E section. And the code I want is E11.321. And I found that code, and the complete description is type 2 diabetes mellitus with mild non-proliferative diabetic retinopathy with macular edema. And that is exactly what he has. So that is the correct code for our principal diagnosis. Now I'm going to look up the next code. The next code is a secondary diagnosis, and it is diabetic cataract. So I'm going to go back to the alphabetical index. I'm going to look up diabetes again, and I want to find diabetes with cataract. So I've got diabetes with and cataract. It's very close to the top of the list, E11.36. So now I need to go to the tabular list again to verify that. I'm going to look for code E11.36. Again, I find the E section, and I go down and I find E11.36. The complete code description is type 2 diabetes mellitus with diabetic cataract. So that is my second code, my first secondary diagnosis. one thing that I need to do when I'm looking up the codes until I get familiar with all of the instructional notes of the book is look up at the beginning of each section. So I want to page back to the beginning of E11 and see if there's any instructional notes. And I do see an instructional note. It states in red in my book, use additional code to identify any insulin use. And in parentheses, it shows Z79.4. So I know I need to code the long-term use of insulin for this patient. I also want to go to the beginning of the E section and see if there's any instructional notes there. And there are no instructional notes that apply to diabetes. The only instructional note applies to neoplasms, which this patient does not have. So now I want to code the long-term use of insulin. So I go back to the alphabetical index and I look up long-term, and I see that at the bottom of the page, long-term drug therapy. So I go to the next column and I look for insulin. And I found it right here, and the code is Z79.4. So I need to go back to my tabular list. Z is at the very end of the alphabet, so this is very close to the end of our code book. We're going to find Z79.4. And the complete code description is long-term current use of insulin. And if I look at the top of the Z79 section, it says code also any therapeutic drug level monitoring, which does not apply to this scenario. So now we've found our three codes. They are Z11.321, Z11.36, and Z79.4. And see, that wasn't near as difficult as what you thought it would be when you first looked at this code book, was it?